Okay. It's not ready yet. Hey everyone. Good morning. How are you? I'm Pilar Marrero, Associate Editor of Ethnic Media Services. Welcome to today's Ethnic Media Service Zoom news briefing. The news that Texas authorities were deploying razor wire at the border and allegedly ordering local agents to push exhausted and hungry asylum seekers back into the river barely made a blip in the news. Hateful rhetoric and actions against immigrants by those who seek political gain are a constant theme in US history, involving both sides of the political spectrum. But the overt cruelty is getting bolder, particularly in places like Texas and Florida. Our panel will discuss what is going on at the border in that southern state in Texas, and a new lawsuit against limiting immigrants' ability to file for asylum using a particular medium that the Biden administration has decided they should use, and what these actions portend for a new presidential election that is already ongoing and is happening next year. We ask speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will take questions for each panelist as time allows, with more questions at the end. And I think I neglected to say the headline. So the headline of this briefing, the title of this briefing is Hate Escalates at the Border, setting the stage for 2024. Okay, moving on. After we're done, we will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for each speaker to all participants later today. In the panel, we have today Manuel Ortiz Escámez, sociologist, journalist, and documentary filmmaking. He's a colleague that works for Ethnic Media Services, and he has his own Peninsula 360 Press. Then we have Gianna Borrotto, senior litigation attorney at the American Immigration Council, which, among other organizations, filed a new lawsuit this week against the Biden administration's policy at the border. And Carl Gilson, he's professor of political science at Southern Methodist University and author of several books, including the upcoming Race, Ethnicity, and American Decline. We ask speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And we ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. If after you speak, and this is for panelists, you see a question in the chat and you can answer that and we don't get to it when we are asking the question live, please do so. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for each speaker to all participants later today. Okay, now we invite our colleague, Manuel Ortiz, who has been in Eagle Pass, Texas since yesterday, I believe, to tell us what he has seen in the area. Manuel, you told me yesterday that the deaths of 2 migrants, one of them a young person or a child, I'm not exactly sure what age, has dominated the conversation there. Can you tell us what happened and then tell us what you've seen in your visit to Eagle Pass? And tell us where Eagle Pass is.
Thank you very much, Pilar. Eagle Pass is a little town in the south of Texas, is in the border with Mexico. The other side is the city of Piedras Negras, Coahuila, Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I'm here in the border. I'm a few meters from the border. I got here yesterday and I've been in different points of the border. I'd like to start saying that I've been in the border between Mexico and the United States many times, and this is the first time that seems to me like a war zone. I was in the border after the September 11 attacks in 2001, which a lot of they send a lot of army, the National Guard, to the border. It wasn't like this. I think today is a lot more. On the road, coming from San Antonio, you start hearing the helicopters you start seeing sometimes cars, military cars. So it looks like a war zone. I like to share my screen to share some photos. It's possible. Okay. The Texas Governor Greg Abbott has conducted many controversial actions, like he put a razor wire, ship containers in the border. But probably the most controversial action is this floating barrier that we are seeing right now, and is two of the bodies that were found yesterday were very close to the barrier. Actually, one was stuck with the barrier. The local government is claiming that these people didn't die due to the barriers, but actually we don't know. Before this, some human rights defenders, immigration lawyers, and different persons said these barriers will increase the risk of crossing, and is what I think we are saying this. We are seeing this. The operation of in the border is called Operation Lone Star, and this is part of it. This is what the border looks right now. Saying the first time I seen a border like that. Yesterday, when I was going around Eagle Pass, I found a group of about 35 migrants that just crossed the border. And I like to highlight this, that it's been said that smugglers are telling people to cross during the middle of the day, which is very hot. Here is very hot. Today we are 95 degrees Fahrenheit, but yesterday we were 110, and temperature could reach until 150. So people is crossing during the middle of the day when it's very hot. Seems like smugglers are telling migrants that since it's too hot, there is less border patrol. So it's very, very risky. These people who I spoke with yesterday, they had to walk about 6 hours. As you can tell, there are many kids. They are exhausted. The parents have to carry them because of the heat. Let me see if we can hear. Please let me know if you can hear this very short interview. Can you hear it?
I cannot.
No. Let me see.
You guys? No.
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 Then I'm gonna skip this one.
Okay.
Okay. I found pregnant women. As I said, many babies.
Well,
I asked people if they had water. They said yes. They told me that the Border Patrol gave them water, because this is a question that I asked directly. Is the Border Patrol denying water? We have heard that the government requests for local authorities do not give water. I actually hear that some local organizations are denouncing that some water, they put water in some places and someone is taking the water. They are investigating this. But in this case, in this particular case that I saw, these migrants, the Border Patrol gave them water. All of these photos will be available for our colleagues. Yes, I will. I didn't have time to cover the face of kids, but please do so. Oh, this is another video, but I don't think you are able to hear it. So this is
Well,
it.
maybe you can say what people were saying, were telling you.
Oh, yes. I'm gonna, there are very short videos. Most of the migrants that I found on this side of the border are Venezuelans. Some of them are from Honduras, but in the other part, in Piedras Negras, which I went yesterday, I found also people from Mexico. Just a few people from Mexico, but the majority are from Venezuela. They said they have to walk about 6 hours. I asked what has been the most difficult part. They said the jungle. There's a belief that once they are in the United States, they survive. They say we survive. We are, thank God, because we survived, and they believe they will stay here. But local reporters in the Border Patrol didn't answer what's going to happen with these people. They didn't want to answer questions. But their local reporters in Piedras Negras told me that usually they are retaining people for 1 day sometimes, and they're deporting people at the next day at 1 p.m. Now, from the other side of the border in Piedras Negras, I went to the road that usually migrants have to take in order to cross the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo, which how is now in Mexico. And speaking to local journalists in Piedras Negras, they told me that something that happened with Abbott's action is that smugglers increase the cost of crossing into the United States. It's a local cost because the migrants have to pay a lot from the countries they're coming from, but just a local just from the local crossing in Coahuila, they increased from 500 to $1,500. They told me that there's no possible to cross the river without paying these to the smugglers. So it seems like the only winners of Abbott's actions are the human traffickers that are increasing the money that they are asking for. This is the river. This river is so dangerous for many reasons. The migrants sometimes cross the river and they believe the river is very low, as you can tell. I actually went in a little bit into the river, and the water, the deepest water, gave me. I have probably until my belly, but the level could increase, and there's a lot of, I don't know how to say, Pilar, las corrientes son muy fuertes.
Currents, yeah.
Yeah, and they can change. They can change. So that's why a lot of people die in this river, because seems like like just like a very low river. This is in Mexico. There are no shelters in Piedras Negras, or at least I was asking and they told me there's no shelters. Basically, the different churches, iglesias, are serving as a shelters. This is in one of the church. He's a Mexican guy from Michoacan, also trying to cross the border. I asked, are you aware of Abbott's actions here in the border? He said yes. And I say, then why you want to cross exactly on this point of the border? Why not another border? And he says that cartels in Mexico are controlling the border, and in the other parts could be more violent. And about the cartels, speaking with local journalists, they told me that seems like there are no cartels controlling the human trafficking in this part of Mexico, in Piedras Negras, but according to them, actually are the authorities who are getting the money directly from the migrants. So the local authorities, according to them, are doing the human trafficking.
Wow.
This is into church in Piedras Negras, a lot of kids. So people, when they are in, I found kids in here in this church, in already in a very bad condition. Some of them, let me stop sharing my screen. Okay. Some of the kids that I saw in Piedras Negras, they were already in a bad condition because they are sleeping outside. And as I said, it's very hard. And they will have to cross and they will have to walk for 6 hours. So it's, as I think Sandy mentioned before, is a humanitarian disaster. And I will say, not only because of Greg Abbott's actions, which are very unhuman, but also in the other side of the border, with, according to local reporters, seems like the authorities are doing almost nothing against the smugglers. I will stop until here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Gracias. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for taking that trip and giving us a closer look at what's going on there. I know there's a lot of questions. The first thing that is in people's minds is why people do this, right? I just recently met a couple that arrived in LA and they were from Venezuela, young couple with a 15-month-old baby. And they essentially they lived in Colombia for a couple of years and it wasn't good there for them. So they decided to come to the US. They had a friend who lived in LA, promised them to help them. And they said, well, we can make a living there. And they came, they went through the Darien jungle, they went through Central America. And, when I met them, they were left by themselves at the train station because the person they were supposed to meet said they couldn't help them. So somebody asked me to go pick them up. And I said, the guy started crying, I've been awake for weeks trying to protect my wife and my 15-month-old kid. And I said, why did you want to come here? And he said, I just couldn't make a living anywhere that I stopped. I mean, it was so hard in Venezuela. It was so hard in Colombia. I just want a better future for my kids, and it didn't, he knew how risky it was, and people still make this decision. But there are a couple of questions in the chat, Manuel. Ritu Marwa, do you want to ask your question? Ritu Marwa?
Yes, I can ask questions.
Yes, sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. Did you see any Indians or hear of any Indians crossing the border?
I didn't see. I only saw Haitians in this side of the border in a park. They told me that there are many Chinese, which I didn't see, but actually the price the smugglers are asking for migrants depend on the nationality. The highest price, they told me, is for Chinese people. The lowest is for Haitians because they know no connections. They have no money in IT or no money in the United States. Yes, but I didn't see that's what I said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Henrietta, can you ask your question, please? Henrietta Burris.
Yes, thanks, Pilar. Manuel, do you know whether those who are deported tell others who are thinking of leaving of the problems that they face getting to the US, the problems they get into when they get here, and the fact that they too might be deported back, and what's being done to the smugglers?
Seems like the migrants that I spoke with, they are not aware of what's going to happen in here. They believe once they step into the United States, everything will be solved. It's because what they told me. We made it, we did it. They are exhausted, but they are happy. Thanks God. But actually, they will be deported. And another thing that I didn't say before is that local reporters in Piedras Negras told me that once they are deported, smugglers in Mexico are taking them. There's a lot of rapes. There is even disappearing of migrants in Mexico. So the smugglers are waiting for people who are deported, and they know they have no money because they already spent the money trying to cross. just a lot. And since they don't have money, they use the migrants in another way. So it's seems like I spoke with many reporters in Mexico, local reporters. Of course, they asked me to not to mention the names, but they said seems like the authorities are doing almost zero against the smugglers because there's a close connection with the authorities and the human traffickers.
Manuel, usually in the summer with the extreme temperatures, you see a dip, we do know that they have told us that the reopening of the asylum process, which was essentially, and Gianna will tell us more about that, but during the Trump administration and during a lot of the pandemic and during some Biden's administration, it was, everyone was being turned back. Not everyone is being turned back now. There are people who are actually been let in, like this family that I talked to in Los Angeles. Has there been a dip? I mean, what is the situation? What is the flow of migrants right now? Is it more or less? Do you know? Has anyone told you?
I cannot answer the question. No, nobody told me. I don't have the numbers right now. I don't know if it's more or less. I think it's less because I visit two churches and they told me that they have less people than usual. And I don't know if it is because about actions, or it's because of the day, or it's because of the season. They just told me that there is less people in there than usual. And actually, something I didn't mention, some people, due to the actions in Texas, they are even thinking to remain in Mexico, seeing the possibility to stay in Mexico or going to another border, is what some of them told me. They are
To another state.
Another state, yeah.
So, to clarify and let people understand, the Border Patrol is a federal agency, so it carries out the federal laws, and it doesn't depend on Governor Abbott. Governor Abbott has his own force called DPS, Department of Public Safety, as far as I know, and they are doing some kind of enforcement. They're not supposed to be doing immigration enforcement because they're supposed to be forbidden by law, but they are doing things to keep people away. They are putting these boyas, they are putting this razor wire. What have you heard about the interaction between the Border Patrol and the DPS? Have you heard anything? I mean, do they work together? I mean, it shouldn't.
I didn't see it. Actually, what I saw is Border Patrol is working very close to National Guard. There's sometimes working together, but I didn't see DPS agents in the station where I saw the Border Patrol. But I don't know. Maybe I haven't been enough in this area.
You've only been there.
I didn't see. I have photos of the stations where the soldiers and Border Patrol. It's very obvious that they are working together. But no, I haven't seen the DPS agents close to the border.
Peter has a question. Peter Sherman, you want to ask your question, Peter?
Yes, sure. Just quickly, hi Manuel. You and I spoke yesterday. You had an interaction with a police officer, which I thought was interesting because it speaks a little bit to local attitudes around border policy in Texas. Would you mind sharing that briefly?
Of course, Peter. How are you doing? Yeah, yesterday when I was driving from San Antonio to Eagle Pass, I got a speed ticket. I thought I was driving even slower than the limit, but I didn't see that I crossed a little town. So I got a speed ticket, but the good thing is that I have a chance to talk a little bit with these officers, of course, off the record. But I asked him, what do you think about, because he asked me, where are you going? Where are you from? So many questions that usually if you get a stop, you get a speed ticket in any other part of the United States, the officer will not ask you that. But in here, he asks you, where are you from? Where are you going? What are you gonna do? What do you do for your work? And anyway, since he asked me a lot of questions, I also asked questions. I said, what do you think about Abbott's actions in this part? At the beginning, he said, I prefer not to not say anything, but I say off the record, yes, I'd like to know your perspective. And then we start, we have a good conversation. He says that he support a strong border. He support action, the actions of Abbott at the beginning, but not, he said he's doing too much. I don't support the floating barriers. Like I believe there is not, it's inhuman. And this is something that I have here a lot around here. Seems like some local authorities that support Greg Abbott at the beginning are not supporting him anymore. Even local entrepreneurs, the owners of some branch in here, there is a suit. I think there are some suits against the local government. And I start listening that some people are not supporting, some people support some of the actions, but the floating wall was very unpopular. Is what I can tell until now.
Okay, Manuel, please stay around. I'm gonna move on to the other panelists, okay? All right,
Thank you, Pilar. I will be here.
thank you. So we now invite Gianna Borroto. She's senior litigator for the American Immigration Council. And we've been talking about what the Texas authorities have been doing, but she's going to talk to us about the American Immigration Council and other organizations challenging what the Biden administration has been doing in terms of the asylum rules and how they have changed them, et cetera. Gianna, welcome.
Thank you, Pilar. I'll start by providing some background information about the situation at the US-Mexico border, and then I'll discuss the lawsuit that we filed against the Biden administration and what prompted us to file it. So as you mentioned before, the US-Mexico border was largely closed to asylum seekers for the last few years because of Title 42. So that is the public health policy under COVID that was instituted and used mostly as a pretext to close the border and prevent asylum seekers from accessing the asylum process. Since Title 42 ended on May 12th of this year, the US government has been forcing asylum seekers to use an app called CBP-1 to make an appointment to seek asylum at the ports of entry. Now, CBP-1 is a glitchy and unreliable app created by CBP. And so since the end of Title 42, it has become the only way for most non-citizens to access the US asylum process. So last Thursday, July 27th, the American Immigration Council, along with our partners, we filed a class action lawsuit in the District Court for the Southern District of California. The lawsuit challenges the Biden administration's policy of turning away asylum seekers at ports of entry who do not have a CBP-1 appointment, so thereby denying them access to the US asylum process. This is what we refer to as the CBP-1 turnback policy in the lawsuit.
Gianna, can you slow down?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so our plaintiffs are two cross-border immigrants' rights organizations, Al Otro Lado and Haitian Bridge Alliance. And we have 10 individual plaintiffs who are all asylum seekers who are harmed by this policy and denied their fundamental right to seek asylum. And so our challenges to the policy are the following. First, under US law, asylum seekers at ports of entry have a right to seek protection without artificial caps or technological barriers. Imposing a technological barrier to asylum is both unlawful and unconstitutional. The CBP-1 turnback policy also violates the government's own promises and Biden guidance to keep ports of entry open for those who do not have an appointment. And finally, the policy violates international law obligations that prohibit returning refugees to countries where they fear persecution. So next, I'd like to speak a little bit more about the CBP-1 app and why access to asylum cannot be restricted to this glitchy smartphone app. So the CBP-1 turnback policy creates basically an impossible situation for asylum seekers where many just cannot get an appointment through the app. And there are several reasons for that, which we've documented through our lawsuit. First, the asylum seeker needs an up-to-date smartphone and internet access. And as many of you know, many migrants are living without access to regular internet or Wi-Fi because they're living at migrant shelters, or sometimes they're even in encampments where they don't have access to electricity, running water, much less internet. One of our plaintiffs, Natasha Doe, this is her pseudonym, is a Haitian woman currently living at a migrant encampment. She's outside. She lacks reliable electricity to even charge her phone and consistent access to Wi-Fi. She has been unable to get an appointment through the app, though she's been trying for months. Even the cost of getting data is prohibited for asylum seekers. Some migrants have even reported that they've had to make the impossible choice between feeding themselves or buying data so that they can operate the CBP-1 app. In addition to that, many migrants cannot afford an up-to-date phone that can support the app, which takes up a lot of space, and perform all the functions that the app requires. You need a working camera. A lot of migrants' phones don't have that, or the cameras are broken. And it's also unfortunately very common for asylum seekers to be robbed of their phones, their money, and all of their possessions when they're on their journey to the US-Mexico border. Many cannot afford to buy a new phone after that happens. Another of our plaintiffs, Michelle Doe, also a pseudonym, she's an asylum seeker from Nicaragua and a mother to a newborn baby. She approached the port of entry with her baby and was turned away by CBP because she did not have a CBP-1 appointment. She tried to explain that she did not have a working phone at the time, but CBP would not let her through to request asylum because she didn't have an appointment. And her phone was broken because her abusive ex-partner, a Mexican citizen, had thrown it on the ground and broken it when she tried to leave him. And this is the basis of her asylum claim as well. Next, even if an asylum seeker has access to an up-to-date phone, a reliable internet connection, they must also be able to navigate this app, even if it's in a language that they don't understand, or even if they can't read or write. And the app is only available in 3 languages right now: English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. Al otro lado, our organizational plaintiff in the lawsuit conducted a survey of migrants at the southern border, which showed that many migrants were unable to make a CBP-1 appointment because they spoke one of over 20 languages that are not supported by the app. So this includes French, Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, and also a variety of indigenous languages like Garifuna, Miskito, Quechua. Also, if the asylum seeker has a disability that prevents them from using the app, or if they're just not tech savvy, they won't be able to get a CBP-1 appointment. We're aware of a woman who has a brain tumor and was having difficulty getting a CBP-1 appointment because the app would not accept her photograph because she has partial paralysis to her face, so it was not accepting her photo. And she's a client of an organization called the Sidewalk School, which is based in Matamoros, Mexico. Another issue is that the app is just notoriously glitchy. It presents problems for asylum seekers who do speak one of the 3 languages that is supported by the app. Another of our plaintiffs, Pablo Doe, also a pseudonym. For him, the app routinely stalls, it freezes, and it says that there's an update, but he's unable to download the update. And these error messages are appearing for him in English, and that's happening for a lot of people who are trying to use the app in Spanish or in Creole. And they don't understand English usually, and so they can't understand what the app is telling them, what the error could be. And for Pablo, sometimes the screen just shows indecipherable computer code, and he's not sure what's going on. But his experience with the app is unfortunately not unique. Other migrants have experienced an error where the app's geolocation tells them that they're not close enough to the border to request an appointment. And this happens when they're in border cities, so they could not be closer to the border than they are. It's just an error. So despite all these issues that I've mentioned with the app, CBP-1 has no tech support. There's only an email address, and most migrants and attorneys who are helping them who have reached out to this email address have reported never receiving a response. And finally, even if the asylum seeker has access to an up-to-date phone, reliable internet service, speaks one of those 3 languages that is supported by the app, doesn't have a disability or anything else that is preventing them from using the app, they also just need plain luck. There are only 1,450 CBP-1 appointments available each day border-wide, and they're handed out through this lottery system. Most of our plaintiffs have been waiting for an appointment for months. They try every day on the app, but they have not been successful in getting an appointment. And access to asylum simply cannot be restricted to a glitchy smartphone app lottery. So what is the impact on this policy for asylum seekers? Essentially, if a person doesn't have an appointment and they approach a port of entry to seek asylum, CBP has been turning them back and denying them access to the asylum process. Another one of our plaintiffs, Elena Doe, was laughed at by CBP for trying to present at the port of entry without an appointment. She's a Mexican citizen with 2 young children who are all fleeing family and cartel-based violence. And another one of our plaintiffs, Diego Doe, he fled his home based on threats related to his work with the Mexican government. He's a Mexican citizen. He pleaded with CBP to give him a chance to access asylum in the US, but they just turned him away, and they actually directed him to Mexican officials to discuss his issues with CBP's own app. So the CBP-1 policy leaves asylum seekers stranded in dangerous Mexican border cities where violence is prevalent, and it puts their safety at risk. Many of our plaintiffs, like Elena and Diego, and many of the individuals affected by this policy are Mexican citizens. So their situation is especially dire because they're being denied access to the asylum process, and that means that they're being forced to remain in their country of persecution. But for non-Mexican asylum seekers, their lives are also endangered by this policy because their persecutors can find them, especially if they're Central American, or they could become targets of crime simply for being migrants, or because of some other aspect of their identity, for example, if they're LGBTQ+. So I want to talk a little bit, if I'm still good on time, I want to talk a little bit more about why we filed this lawsuit and its effects. Okay, so we filed this lawsuit to protect the fundamental right to seek asylum, which is enshrined in both US and international law. The Biden administration has created this electronic waitlist system, and it has become the only way for people who are fleeing persecution to access asylum at the ports of entry. The exclusive use of the CBP-1 app is a cruel measure to keep our southern border closed to the most vulnerable asylum seekers. And restricting asylum access to only people who can access a glitchy smartphone app imposes unfair and insurmountable barriers for asylum seekers. It limits asylum to people who have both the economic means to afford a functioning smartphone and internet access, but also the tech savviness and language skills necessary to navigate the app. Under the law, asylum seekers must be able to present at a port of entry and receive access to the asylum process, whether they have an appointment or not. Next, I'll discuss a little bit of background in a previous case that is related. So the CBP-1 turnback policy echoes earlier attempts to limit access to asylum at the border. And we discussed some of these earlier. There's MPP, there's the Trump administration's different asylum bans, there's the latest asylum ban issued by the Biden administration. But the American Immigration Council and our partners, we challenged a previous policy where CBP was turning back asylum seekers as early as 2016, and we filed that lawsuit in 2017. That case is also called Al Otro Lado v. Mayorkas, and Judge Bashant of the Southern District of California ruled in September 2021 that this previous version of the turnback policy violated the government's mandatory duties to inspect and process asylum seekers under our immigration law and the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, regardless of the government's purported justification for doing so. This CBP-1 turnback policy, this current policy, is just another example of the US government's unlawful attempts to restrict asylum at the southern border. There's an urgent need to change this policy. We can't allow people to be sent back to danger simply because they can't make an appointment with this flawed app. The lawsuit calls for an end to the harmful policy and highlights the urgent need for fair and accessible asylum processes. Without intervention, countless individual people's lives remain at risk. Asylum is meant to protect those who are fleeing life-threatening harm in their countries, and gatekeeping protection behind an inaccessible app contradicts the purpose of our asylum laws. Our country must comply with its promises and its legal obligations to protect asylum seekers who are fleeing life-threatening harm. We must be a safe haven for individuals seeking that safety and protection. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gianna. There's a number of questions, some of which are probably more relevant to your talk than others, but Henrietta brings up a point. She says, might it be true that the CBP system was intentionally designed to decrease new migration into the US? Seems to me that over time we've seen a lot of different policies that had that effect and probably that intention. What's your opinion about this?
I think that that's a very good theory. I don't have the knowledge to give you a good answer on that, but I think it's a fair theory knowing what we know about previous attempts to restrict asylum at the southern border.
Yeah. I mean, we can go back, and we were talking about this yesterday. We can go back to the 90s, and they had Bill Clinton had something called Operation Gatekeeper, which pushed people from California into the mountains of Arizona. And a lot of people were dying at the time. And I don't think that deterred immigration at all. So that's an interesting thing. You have to look back in history to see that many of these attempts really failed, because people are coming here for other reasons that are unrelated to the enforcement. Peter has also a question. He says, Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, contends the administration is doing what it can under a broken system. What is your response to that, Gianna? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, of course, we would love for Congress to act on immigration reform. But I think the situation at the border is really a repetition of previous policies that have failed and have been found unlawful. And so that's why we're challenging this turn back policy.
But is the US in an impossible situation here? How do you manage the flow of people that want asylum and the flow of people who just want to cross the border?
Yeah, I think our position is that CBP needs to provide a way for people to present at the port of entry who cannot use this app. The app has many issues. Potentially it could be improved, but regardless, there needs to be a way for people to present who cannot access the app.
Gotcha. I don't know if maybe Manuel knows the answer to this. What are people who are immigrating from countries such as China or Russia deported to, if and when they are deported? Some people can't be deported, like Cubans, I think. And Gianna, I think you're Cuban, so.
Yes, I am. Actually, we did recently restart removals to Cuba. I would have to look up. I'm not totally sure about China and Russia and the status at this point. So we would have to get back to you on that.
Okay. I don't know, Manuel, do you know? People who they call them OTMs, other than Mexican. This is exactly what they call them, which is dehumanizing, my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that there are some Russians waiting to cross here in Piedras Negras, in hotels.
Oh, you met them, or did you meet any, or were just told that?
No, they told me in the iglesias, in the churches, and also local reporters told me that.
Okay.
But I didn't meet.
Okay, let's move on to Professor Gilson. Welcome, and thank you for waiting and listening in. We just want to take a little bit of the political view of this issue, because we know how political it is. Governor Abbott, Republican, you have in Florida, you have all these new anti-immigrant laws. We had anti-immigrant laws 25 years ago here in California too. So, and we have them in Arizona, we have them all over the country. Many of them were defeated, but they had a purpose, and a lot of the purpose was political. So can you talk to us about how you see this current iteration and how it relates to, the political situation of the United States and the upcoming elections?
Yeah, certainly. The title of our session today is Hate Escalates the Border, Setting the Stage for 2024. So I thought I'd make three relatively quick points and try to make them slowly so that the translation can take place. The first is contextual, and that is that a number of my books, 2 or 3 of them, have been about the way in which race, ethnicity, and immigration have been treated in American history. And so the question in the early stages of the 2024 election, particularly for Republican candidates like Tim Scott of South Carolina, is has America been a racist country? Is it a racist country? And the answer to that is yes. Historically, America has been a racist country. White supremacy was very broadly accepted through most of American history, and immigrants have been very roughly treated from the very beginning. Benjamin Franklin said terrible things about the German immigrants to Pennsylvania in the 1750s. The Irish were treated badly in the 1840s and 1850s. The Asians were excluded completely from the 1880s through into the 1950s. And so I see the current events at the border as part of an American, particularly white American, ambivalence about immigration, and particularly immigration of non-white peoples, brown people, Black people, yellow people. So it has ever been thus. And most of white or Anglo-America's thinking about immigration developed in history when 80% of Americans were Anglos, as we say in Texas. Blacks were the next largest group at 15% or something like that, a little bit less now. Hispanics and Asians were here in very small numbers until the 20th century. And so the current situation at the border has been replayed many times over the course of American history. And I think that the politics of the border currently is fascinating in the sense that Republicans in Texas and nationally have the political advantage. If not the legal and moral advantage, they do have the political advantage, because in politics, a simple message is often a winner. And the Republican message on immigration is we oppose illegal immigration and we're worried about legal immigration, perhaps being too large. We need to stop it. We need to slow it, if not to stop it. And so we need a border wall. We need tight electronic controls on the border in order to know who's coming into the country. So from the Republican perspective, we want less of it. That's a kind of bumper sticker slogan. Democrats have a much more complex coalition of supporters, some of whom recognize that the Republican charge that Democrats stand for open borders is a political killer for Democrats. Many other Democrats who are favorably disposed toward immigrants and toward asylum seekers and people trying to find a better life in the country. The Republican message is simple. The Democratic message is complex and is oftentimes divided. It's not nearly as simple. And so I think Republicans have the advantage there. And Anglos tend to be mostly Republican. Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians tend to be mostly Democrat, and Texas is a Republican state. So it's Republicans that are setting closed border policies, tight policies on the border, and it's likely to remain that way for some time. Just briefly on the 2024 presidential election, I think that Democrats hope that the border and immigration are not major issues in 2024, because Democrats sense that provides a Republican advantage. And I think it's probably the case that immigration and the border will not loom large in 2024, particularly if the economy remains strong. So I think that the border and immigration issues in the 24 candidate selection process in the general election likely favor Republicans in the primaries and work against Republicans in the general election. So I would expect to see Trump be the Republican nominee, and I would expect to see him defeated in the general election, because We have had very close elections since 2000. Democrats have won the popular vote in 5 out of 6 of those elections, even though they have lost the presidency after 3 of those elections. I think 2024 will be close as well. But in a close election, if one side is bleeding just a little bit of support because their voters can't stomach part of their message or their main candidate, that would be the Republicans that are bleeding support. So I think in the general election, it's a Democrat advantage. So I'll stop there and let people place their bets.
Well, you didn't mention the elephant in the room, which is 3 criminal indictments against the apparent candidate of the Republican.
Well, that doesn't seem to be hurting him in the primaries. It will in the general.
Correct. Got you. Thank you so much. So in the case of people like Governor Abbott, we know that Governor DeSantis from Florida, he's running for the nomination of the Republican Party, but while Abbott seems to, be a shoo-in for whatever he wants to do in Texas. So why is he doing this?
Well, he's doing this because it galvanizes his Republican base. In Texas, Democrats haven't won a statewide election in more than a quarter of a century. So it means that Republicans consider the only meaningful election to be the Republican primary. And the way you handle a Republican primary is you don't let anyone get to your right. And so that's what Abbott is doing. He is appealing to that 3, 4, 5% of the Texas electorate that forms a majority in the low turnout Republican primary. And so winning the Republican primary puts you in a dominant position to win the general election. Now in 2018, Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of beating Ted Cruz. That's as close as a Democrat has come in a long time. And until Democrats begin to win, Republicans will continue going hard right, figuring the general election will take care of itself.
Thank you, Professor Gilson. And Peter Sherman was talking about climate change, migration, having become global. Is this a departure from past decades when it comes to the issue of immigration in the US? Does anyone have any insights about this? I know a lot of the refugees are Venezuelan, which is where I'm from, and I don't think climate change has much to do with that.
Yeah, I think historically the immigration has been regional, with Mexico being the country from which most immigrants have come, but certainly Cuba and Central and Northern South America have more recently provided lots of people. But since the immigration laws were opened up in the Johnson administration in 1965, Asia and Latin America have been provided 80–90% of immigration into the country.
Thank you, Professor. All right, there is another question here from Peter White. I don't know that anyone will be able to answer this. Peter, you want to ask your question? Maybe Gianna has something to say.
Yeah, it was kind of a little off topic, but I just I got a tip today from a source. 150,000 kids last year were moved through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. I was just wondering how many of them are kids separated from their parents at the border.
Gianna, do you have any idea about this?
I don't have numbers on that. The American Immigration Council did file a case, a Federal Torts Claim Act case against the Trump administration's family separation policy. We're representing several mothers who are separated from their children under that policy, but I'm afraid I don't have numbers of current separations that are happening. I believe the administration is making an effort to prevent that from happening. I did hear that it's happening in Texas,
Yes.
but I don't have the facts.
I believe the Office of Refugee Resettlement is the one that handles the refugee system, which is different from the asylum system, right? So,
Well, they handle the unaccompanied children. So
Okay,
typically, so under family separation, these children should not have been placed in Office of Refugee Resettlement custody because they came with a parent. Typically, these are kids that arrive at the border without a parent. And so then they go through the ORR process and are released to a sponsor here in the United States. Sometimes they go to foster care if they don't have a sponsor.
Professor Gilson, I have a question for you. Do you think that is the U.S. public at all affected by documentation of cruelty against migrants at the border? And I do remember there was an outcry with the Trump family separation, but I don't remember any other time when there was a big outcry like that. What do you think about?
I think that certainly people are affected by evidence of cruelty, but those who are affected are already sympathetic to immigrants. Those who are unsympathetic to immigrants see the floating barriers and the razor wire as means are required to affect the end they desire. So you really sort of preaching to the choir in terms of the people who are offended already being sympathetic, and it doesn't seem to move people who are unsympathetic very much. And I did see a question at the bottom of the screen that I can sort of address very quickly about immigration history and whether it has ever made sense. And I think you could say that in the 19th century, it made sense to the dominant white majority in the country. And it was effectively, if you're white, y'all come. It was pretty open immigration, particularly from Europe, which is where the vast majority of people came. But even in the early 20th century, when the American economy was strong and labor was needed, there was a welcoming of people across the border from Mexico into the United States on the presumption that they would work cheap and go home when the work was completed. But when the economy tightened up and recession came, people would be forced back, sometimes violently, sometimes just by a lack of work, be forced back across the border. That was the traditional American immigration policy, that when we need you, we'll call you. When we don't, we expect that you'll head home. And you know, the second half of the 20th century is when people came and decided they wanted to stay and did stay and were worried about whether if they went home, they could get back in again. So I think that American immigration policy made more sense to particular eras earlier in American history than it seems to make now. Because I think, as Gianna said, ideally you would get legislation to modernize the immigration system in the United States, but there's little chance of that in the contemporary Congress.
And that's a problem, a really big problem that we haven't had time to talk about today, because for 30 years or more, we haven't had a real immigration reform. But we're about to close. We only have 2 minutes left. So I want to invite Manuel back. I don't see you, Manuel. Where are you? Okay.
He's interviewing Russians.
Okay. Let's just close the call and invite Gianna and Professor Gilson to give us their last thoughts about the topic. Gianna?
Sure. Thank you all so much for having me. I think I would just say that most people can relate to having a frustrating experience with a piece of technology. Now, imagine that this piece of technology is standing between you and being able to seek protection when you're fleeing for your life. This issue that we're litigating really presents a life or death issue for the migrants that are fleeing persecution in their countries. And we hope that we will be successful in this lawsuit to end this policy.
Thank you, Professor Gilson.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation and keep doing the good work.
Thank you. Manuel, what are your thoughts after visiting that area of Eagle Pass? From what you have seen? Can you unmute? Okay. Can you hear me, Manuel?
I can hear you, but
Okay.
okay, right now,
Yeah.
yes. I can.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Pilar, for this. You know,
You only have
I will
1 minute.
be here around up. I'm very surprised every time I come to the border is something new and something worse. It's very human
What's going on in here and demand.
for our attention. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Thank you everyone for being with us today and for the reporters as well. And have a good weekend. We'll see you next week.